venit la punctul de plecare. Aproape întotdeauna, întrebările pe care le pun invitațiilor mei îi privesc pe ei înșiși, propria lor călătorie de viață și de credință. Dar invitatul meu de astăzi, Anthony Stahl, deși ar avea foarte multe lucruri de spus despre sine, va vorbi astăzi despre străbunicii săi, Ferdinand și Anna Stahl. La începutul secolului trecut, cei doi au fost atât de entuziasmați de mesajul de sănătate și credință al Bisericii Adventiste, încât au hotărât să îl ducă acolo unde nu îl dusese nimeni, în populațiile indigene de pe platourile înalte din Peru și Bolivia și apoi pe fluviul Amazon. În modul cel mai real, misiunea i-a transformat pe ei, așa încât Ferdinand și-a schimbat numele în Fernando, tipic pentru America de Sud, și a revoluționat pe multe planuri viața din cele două țări. Așadar, iată istoria uimitoare a familiei misionare Stahl. Welcome to the starting point. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Just a few months ago, through a mutual friend, Dr. Peter Landless, we met in your hospital, and at that time I learned your special connection with the historical family in our church. So I wanted very much to have you sharing your memories and what you know about the family Stahl. Now, before of that, briefly introduce yourself. I say briefly because I really hope that in the future we'll be able to set aside one full program just for you and your ministry. So now, briefly about yourself.
Well, thank you. And thank you for this invitation to share. It's a privilege to talk with your viewers today. My name is Anthony Stahl, and of course, I was raised out in the Pacific Northwest on the stories of my great-grandpa, Fernando Stahl. As we talk, I'll just call him Grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And I even remember as a young boy, my sister and I, they would dress us up in the garb of the local indigenous populations of Lake Titicaca and the Amazon. We would have spears, blowguns. We would sing in Spanish, and my grandpa would talk about his experiences in Peru. I finished a degree in business, went on to work in international development with ADRA for about 14 years, and am now currently working in healthcare, have two wonderful boys and a lovely wife.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. As I said, I hope much more about you in a future program. Now, you have already mentioned your famous great-grandfather, Fernando Stahl. I don't think you mentioned his wife, your great-grandmother, Anna Stahl.
Right.
Yeah. So would you like to tell us a little bit about their origins? Their names sound very German, of course. So they would say Stahl.
Stahl.
Yeah. And so tell us about their origins.
Be happy to. You know, when you look back on Great Grandpa Stahl, many in Adventism see him as someone who went to South America, which he did, and did amazing things there through God's grace and his help. However, his beginnings were very humble. At a very young age, his father passed away. So his stepfather was fairly cruel to him. He was abused mentally and physically. And Grandpa looked forward to a time when he could take on his stepfather in a fight. And at a young age, he left home and ran with a very dangerous gang. In fact, my family tells me this gang was very dangerous. Some of the gang members killed other people. My grandpa tells me a time when his dad, they stole chickens from a farmhouse and then went to the front door and asked to borrow matches so they could start a fire and roast the chickens. So in that, he grew up, and finally he was strong, felt powerful, and he returned home to beat up his stepfather. Well, he got home and he felt sorry for his stepfather, and his stepfather cowered back, and later Grandpa began to go to work, simple trade,
Mhm.
and he met the most beautiful young lady, Anna, in
Mhm.
a restaurant. And they were sometime later they married. And through colportering and Bible studies, they came into the Adventist church and then took training at Battle Creek, Michigan as nurses. And that training would serve them well later on. Now, they became rather comfortable. You look back, Anna wrote in a diary that we have, she was so excited that they bought their first house. They
Mhm.
ended up owning 3 small sanitariums. Nothing like what we would think we would, large institutions. These were small. So
Mhm.
they were doing well. And then Grandpa was convicted. We've been so blessed. I want to go to the hardest place
Mhm.
in the world to serve the Lord. And that was his dream. He said, I want to go.
So that was what was the time? It was the beginning of the 20th century. Yeah.
It was when he started really having this desire to go to the hardest place in the world and give back of his time, his talents. This was probably around 1907, 1908, just before the General Conference session of 1909.
Yeah. Uh, Also, your great grandmother was also of European descent. Yeah, she was from the Scandinavia, I think.
She absolutely was. She was. I was just looking at their marriage certificate, and it notes she was from Sweden.
Sweden. Mhm. She was also a sturdy person, like him. Was the same temperament, or yeah. What kind of a person was she?
Anna, especially in those, it took a special person to follow great grandpa because he was one of these tough Germans, Stahl, and he was domineering.
Mhm.
My grandpa talks about his dad, and it took that kind of personality. While Anna had a soft heart, a soft touch, she was an adventurer.
Hmm.
And there were times later on in life where she would be basically running the operations of the mission for months while great grandpa disappeared into the Amazon jungle.
Hmm.
And she did, yeah, of course, back then there was no telegraph, cell phone, there was nothing. So for months, she wouldn't even know if he was still alive.
Oh no.
And she was just a strong woman with tremendous fortitude to continue forward under really difficult circumstances.
That missionary interest in this family was also, I mean, connected with a strong interest among Adventists in general, and probably beyond Adventists in the Christianity in general. Yeah, about that time.
You're right. That was shortly after really the Great Awakening. There was a tremendous interest in going out and sharing around the world and not just keeping some of that knowledge internally. So, absolutely, there was not only among Adventism, but when many other faiths, an interest to go out and share.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear from you more about the methods, the way, the spirit they took with them, because in our days, especially, uh, the, the methods, the attitudes of many missionaries of that time are not very well, spoken about, or described. They are put somehow in the same spirit with colonialism, or European centrism, or things like that. Rather, I mean, destroying the local culture rather than empowering and enriching them. So I'll be curious to hear from you, how was their work there. So you mentioned the General Conference of the Adventist Church in 1909. What happened at that time?
Well, this took lots of faith, and I don't know if I would do what great grandpa did, but he had been communicating with the General Conference
Mhm.
and had some very polite letters which said, you know, it'd be nice if you want to go somewhere, we can't really afford it. He had written to Ellen White as well, and she suggested that he attend the session of the General Conference, the world meeting of the Adventist Church. So great grandpa proceeded to sell everything he had, his house, his businesses, and all of his cash he carried on him, and they traveled to the General Conference session where he met many of the church officials and leaders and talked with them about serving. And he said, I want to go to the hardest place, by the way, the hardest place. And they said, well, Brother Stahl, you know, we admire your enthusiasm, but we don't have the money. And he patted his his wallet where he carried all that money, and he says, if you'll, I can go with your blessing, I will pay my way. So he had two options: Madagascar in Africa,
Mhm.
and the highlands, the altiplano of Peru and Bolivia. And they chose South America. And think about this, not speaking Spanish. And in Peru, there's two official languages, Spanish and Quechua.
Mhm.
And he spoke neither. So to get on a ship and go down to South America without an infrastructure. You know, today we think of missionaries going down. There's offices, there's people to meet us at an airport. Well, this was pretty barren. You're just heading out.
They go to they go to a mission institute. They take classes in cultural anthropology and tropical disease and all kinds of things. Yeah.
Right, you're exactly right, brother. It's exactly right. You know, today we go through all of this Mission Institute and how to adapt to another culture. There was none of that. It's get on the ship and head out. And the arrival was very difficult. There were times, my family tells me, that they would kneel down along the shore of Lake Titicaca and just bawl, just cry. It was difficult, and questioning why are we here? Of course, they started in Bolivia for 2 years,
Mhm.
and they really worked among the wealthy of that area. Um, However, when great grandpa went over to the Lake Titicaca, to Plateria, Puno, Juliaca area, and saw the enormous need, a downtrodden race bought and sold as property by the rich landowners and politicians who supported that type of trade, he was appalled. And so you asked a great question: what were his methods? What were his tactics? And his training came in very well, and Anna's training. They started by taking care of more the physical needs of of the indigenous population. They tell me a story I heard, and it's probably printed somewhere, where they got word that one of the chiefs, um, his finger got caught in a rope and pretty much almost ripped off.
Mhm.
So they said, Dr. Stahl, could you go and amputate or operate, do something? So he went over and he had no anesthesia. So he talked to the chief and he says, I can help you, but I don't have anything for the pain. So the chief took off his hat, stuffed it in his mouth, and said, "Go." And he asked someone, "Why did he put his hat in his mouth?" And they said, "Well, because he's going to scream really loud." So then he proceeded to amputate the finger and sew it up, and it brought great trust by that population, teaching them simple things of washing their hands, better diet, um, establishing just health protocols. They knew nothing of this. Another key area was education. At that time, the indigenous population were not allowed to use Western clothing or allowed to learn the official language, Spanish. So they
Really?
set up educational institutions to teach the indigenous. Now that created a firestorm with the rich landowners. That was they were very upset. So they really wanted to, they many times attempted to assassinate great grandpa. He was really hitting at their economic base, their labor force that were held in bondage, and they were not happy with him. Um, they really, because he was actually, it was creating a social revolution. People were learning to read, to write, how to take care of themselves. And by the way, I would say he was the first ADRA worker because he set up like a farm, like people could come into the town and sell their farming goods right out directly to the end user and actually make some money.
Mm.
And that gave them economic power. And this was a big problem for the politicians, the rich landowners. So they fought back, and they fought back very hard. They did not want this crazy German in their midst. They wanted him out,
Yeah.
out of there.
Mhm. So there are strong reasons for the elite to abhor, to reject this kind, because by keeping the population in illiteracy, and they are able to have them sign contracts without knowing what's there, and
You're
then
absolutely
keeping them bound to them, because you put your finger here, it's your finger here, so you signed it. They are able, when doing trade, they are able to underpay them because they are not able to count, they are not able to compute. And so by such simple things like teaching them to read what they are signing, at least, and helping them to compute, to know what they give, what they receive, that was already uh, dead, dead norm for the pervert and corrupt practices.
That's absolutely right. You've summarized it well. They were able to really, if they weren't bought and sold with the land because they got into so much debt that they basically had to work for free, they were basically really tricked into sale of property or their services for almost nothing. They couldn't read, they couldn't write, and were really held bondage by the wealthy mestizo landowners who, and geographically, when you go to this area, you can see it's blocked off by much of the, by, let's say, Lima, it's highlands, it's at about almost 13,000 feet above sea level, high altitude. So they just kept them as a sunken race. They gave them a lot of alcohol to drink, coca leaf, and just kept them to do their bidding. And it was a sad situation that really Grandpa and Grandma Stahl came upon when they arrived there. And yeah, it was a huge revolution what they began to initiate as they educated, took care of their health.
Uh, do you know what was the initial response or reaction of those population? Because in many situations, we know that initially they resisted missionaries or other reformers going to help them because they didn't trust strangers. And it's a normal human reaction before you learn that these people are here with no personal interest. You don't know that from the beginning. So do you know what in general was the initial reaction of the indigenous population?
Yeah, and there's a really good book that Grandpa writes, In the Land of the
Of the
Incas.
Inca? Mhm.
He talks some about that, and he comments that it was a very unfriendly group, and there was general distrust. So partly it was to find community leaders who he could gain their trust, who would invite him to help with their village, their area. And as they begin ministering to the physical needs, they gain tremendous trust,
mm,
including their enemies.
mm.
There are many stories about rich landowners, uh, community leaders who were out to assassinate Grandpa Stahl, who he would be called, please come. This is in the middle of the night. Can you please come and take care of somebody? Well, who is it? Well, please, we can't tell you. Just come. And he would arrive to the home, where the governor would be there and the mayor and leading officials. And then there's a sworn enemy of great grandpa, very ill, and he would nurse them back to health.
Oh my.
And win their trust and confidence, people who were clearly out to do him harm. And it didn't matter. He went and he took care of them. In fact, one rich landowner who had said, I'm gonna get Fernando Stahl, I'm gonna get him,
Hmm.
got he had a bad accident. And grandpa took care of him, nursed him back to health. And this rich landowner paid grandpa a salary for the rest of his time while he was there,
Oh.
probably more than the church could have paid him. That, I'm retaining you as my personal physician. And that created enormous, the people could see it. Like, here's this leading citizen, very wealthy. And now he's saying, I accept Stahl as my doctor, and puts him on a retainer.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah. So he also had some connections in the higher society, some by need. I mean, as a result of being helped. But I also think, especially Anna, also had these methods of working for the elite to get some money, to have money for the poor, something like that.
She did, particularly in her first few years there, as they were learning the language.
Mhm,
She took care of the children and families of the very elite, particularly in Bolivia.
mhm,
Um, she took care of them. She was in demand, received a good salary that then went right back into the work.
mhm,
And um, yeah, especially at the beginning of their ministry and their work in South America, they were able to connect with that elite group of individuals in society, and take care of them and their children. And my grandpa would always tell me that I haven't seen this published anywhere, that great grandpa probably had a gold mine. And when the church had needs, he'd get some of that gold and sell it. And I've always thought, well, where's that gold mine? But, I don't know. It's just something grandpa would tell me, that he felt that his dad had that gold mine that served exclusively for the use of, furthering the work, especially in the Amazon.
mm. I suppose at that time our church was inexistent in those territories. Is that right?
They had, of course, the South American division.
Sure.
And I know that, however, Grandpa would continue to ask, I want to live among the people. I want to be with them. They were always asking him to become president of the mission.
Mm,
And he really pushed back in a very kind way. So I want to be with the people. I want to be really pioneering on the very fringe, out where we haven't gone before. At the very end of his career in South America, where they now have the Anna Stahl Clinic in Iquitos on the Amazon, he became for a short time the mission president. And
mm,
there's a funny story about this. The division president said, Elder Stahl, we haven't received your board votes at the division yet. This is like towards 1939. So Grandpa thought to himself, I haven't had any board meetings. So he called his assistant and said, write down my decisions for the last year. These are the board minutes. So she wrote them down and sent them to the division as the minutes of the mission. So that would, be a typical, probably, tough German. This is my way, and my decisions, I am the board. But he didn't enjoy being that was not his area that he enjoyed or thrived in, administration.
Mhm.
He really wanted to be on the front line, out living with the people, and continued to ask for that. Many times he was very sick, and Anna, both with typhoid, with malaria,
Mm.
extremely ill and near death. And there was a time when a connection, I think it's when he wrote his first book, said, come over to Arequipa. It's lower altitude. It's a beautiful city. It's called the White City. And he went and just rested there,
Mhm.
and stayed in this gentleman's home and came back to health. And multiple times, the church brethren at the general conference said, Brother Stahl, you need to come home. And he would say, please, there's more to do. There's
Mm.
more to do. And that's one reason he went to the lower altitude eventually. He left the high altitude of the Andes and
Mhm.
went to the Amazon.
Mhm.
And so I can continue to work there because it's lower altitude. And so he really had a passion, just a passion for people, that empathy to work among them, to create leaders who could continue, you know, uh, pulling teeth, doing simple healthcare, starting schools. That was just a passion of his.
Do we have any reports showing the progress and how the population responded? I mean, how the communities were transformed. Uh, what tools do we have to measure, not to measure, but to show that there was a real transformation? How do we know that?
I know that I have met some scholars and anthropologists have documented the work of Stahl and the work of Adventists around the lake. It's a fascinating studies that have been done that document the radical change during that time period, um, especially around Lake Titicaca. The number of um, people who it just changed their life. It's incredible.
Mm,
And in addition, the number of schools, hundreds of
mm,
schools.
mm.
Um, in fact, the educational system that Grandpa Stahl started in our Adventist church, I recall some years back, I was invited to speak before the Peruvian Congress,
Oh,
along with um, a descendant of uh, Luciano Chambe, who worked closely with Fernando Stahl. And
mhm.
it was, they were honoring the work of Grandpa Stahl, the Adventist Church, in especially the area of education. So education, it really influenced that whole area and the whole country. And it was just a powerful moment to see how, the change that happened. In fact, Dr. Chambe is a neurosurgeon.
Mm.
And he said, look, just a few generations from my grandpa who couldn't read or write, who was a peasant. And now today, because of what we learned through Stahl and others, I'm a neurosurgeon. And what a change. What a change has come over that population.
Mm. Yeah, I've also read that a, a Peruvian theologian, one of the fathers of the so-called liberation theology, Gustavo Gutierrez, spoke highly about the work of the Stahls, saying that they were in fact the precursors of liberation theology, for sure, without thinking on that, but that was their work.
Right. So true. I've read some of his work, and you're right. It just lauded as just that. You're right. That liberation theology, um, that really just didn't focus on some
Mhm.
future heaven or some place, but here today, that made a change in the life of people, that liberated them. So yes, it's recognized by local scholars and international scholars as making a big change, particularly in the highlands of Peru.
Mhm. Speaking of the resistance and how far they went in slandering him, or I have here a quotation from a uh, from a newspaper from 1923 in Lima, El Heraldo, saying they spread doctrines of the most crimson communism. They attempt to destroy patriotism and the spirit of the nation by inculcating the most extreme and dangerous socialist concepts. And what were those concepts? Social organization, class and racial equality, and unbounded liberty in the ignorant masses.
Isn't it incredible? Yes. All of that masking really what was happening, a destruction to their economic base.
Yes.
It's, and you're right. And I know this is a well-known story. My grandpa was going through a village and they were cursing him. They were calling him every name in the book, and he didn't know much Spanish. And so all he could say was in Spanish, the same to you. So as they were yelling, well, the same to you, the same to you. Later, my grandpa, he knew Spanish well. He said, Dad, did you know they were cursing you and you were saying same to you? But, yeah, he suffered a lot of just huge criticism by the press, as you pointed out, nationally from Lima, regionally, the politicians. They were really accusing him of creating, yeah, you're right, socialism, just a type of system that didn't even exist,
Yeah,
and masking what was really happening there.
sure. Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, history says that the religious establishment of the time was also, in alliance with the landowners and the judges and politicians and police, keeping them in submission and ignorance. And so they came to totally turn upside down the whole structure of society.
Yes, you're right. It was that three powers really that were suppressing 90% of the population. The religious group of that day, the predominant religious group, the politicians, so the authorities, and then the very rich landowners. So that three-pronged approach, we're really suppressing, unfortunately, this whole population around Lake Titicaca.
Yeah. Have you ever traveled in those regions ever?
I have. I had the privilege of serving ADRA as in Peru as the director, and so many times was able to go to that area of Peru, just a beautiful area, and visit with the populations and the team there. And it is challenging. You know, when you're that high altitude, there's not a lot of oxygen, but it is absolutely gorgeous. You know, Lake Titicaca is the highest freshwater lake that's navigable in the world. And you get that high up on the roof of the world. It's something else.
Yeah. So what were your perception when you have been able to go there? How was the current condition of the indigenous population? Of course,
Mhm.
I suppose there are many intermarriages and yeah, many changes. How is today the condition of those populations? Was that revolution, I mean, peaceful revolution, continued, or after a while, they tended to return to the previous practices and yeah.
Especially in the more urban areas,
Mhm,
I would say that the populations are healthy,
mhm,
highly educated, thriving in their environment, and that there is sustainable change.
Mhm.
If you go far enough out, and I went to some very rural areas, it's still a very difficult area to live. And still, when I visited there, this is in 2002, 2003, when I worked there.
Mhm.
So it's some time ago, but there's still areas where military or police don't even go into those areas.
Mm.
They take the law into their own hands and decide what punishments will take place, if any. It's a fascinating culture, even up to this day. And a
Mhm.
lot of it is just those geographic barriers that really the authorities don't go into some of those areas.
Mm.
And but I would definitely say that it clearly there is sustainability in general in that area.
Sure. Mhm. 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 I can't even imagine how it was for you to 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 go over the same land where your great grandfather and mother have been so many times and worked so hard, more about almost 1 century ahead of you.
It was humbling, to grow up hearing these stories. You take it for granted. You just take it for granted. That's just what happens. But it was humbling to go back and when I first visited, I was fairly young. I was so anxious to visit. I was 18.
Oh.
So I did meet people who knew my grandpa and great grandpa. And actually, one gentleman sang the song "Jesus Loves Me" in
Mm.
English. He
Mm.
said he learned it from my grandpa,
Oh.
and that's all he knew was the song "Jesus Loves Me" in English, but he was anxious to sing it. Uh, Large crowds turned out, and it was humbling to see that impact. Schools that are named after Fernando Stahl. I think he would be shocked and would not.
Mm.
He did not look for any acclaim, any fame. In fact, in Paradise, behind his home, there was this large rock. And my dad tells me that he remembers going out early in the morning and listening to Fernando Stahl pray.
Mm.
And he would pray sincerely. He would go through all the leaders that he remembered in South America that he'd worked with, and he'd mention them by name, and he would just lift them up, and he would just pray that better days would come, the Lord would come. Very sincere and very dedicated.
Mm.
And so to go back and see that heritage, and it makes me think all of us have a sphere of influence. We may not have that same impact
Mm.
at that global a scale, but all of us have impact in the people around us that ripple out, and we can't be neutral, in our influence. It's either for good or bad, and what a privilege we all have to influence people around us. And I think these same tactics are important. Do we really care for our neighbor? Are
Mm.
they doing okay? Do we know about their kids? Is their health good? How can we minister to them just socially where we are, our neighbors, our colleagues where we work, to take a real interest in them? And I think those were the things that Grandpa used and Grandma in really caring about the people. And did they care? I mean, they really did.
Yeah, I think especially in time like this we live now, when individualism is so takes all the center, you know, place, and ethnocentrism, or
Yeah.
my nation first, or things like that. Yeah, to remember how our forefathers left their comfort, left everything, and risking their life. They could have been dead in the first day after
Yes.
being there. Or
Yes.
yeah, and to remember that, I think it's a strong rebuke, and at the same time a calling from God to think seriously. What are we about here? What is the the mission we live for.
You're so right. And I think of great grandpa leaving the comforts of home,
Mhm.
going to South America, and he really integrated. He didn't go down with, often as you've alluded to, it's tempting for missionaries, not only in the Adventist church, to confuse how we live in our country, to impose the way we live to other cultures, how we dress, the rituals that we have. And it's not the right approach. And grandpa didn't do that. It was,
Sure.
he met them where they were. He loved them. He ate their food, sat down with them on the ground, laughed with them, talked with them, got to know them, loved them. There's an amazing book written by Pastor Bouillon. It's in Spanish only, but it's called He Loved Us.
Mhm.
In Spanish, Él nos amaba. And the people said, he came down and he just loved us. And they felt that love and care. It wasn't imposing, well, this is how I live in the US. And, this is no, it was, I love you, take you where you are, and I want to help you be a better person through education, through health, economic ways. So it was pretty revolutionary, gaining their trust and not judging. I don't think his intent was to go down and change the local way that they lived. It was to raise them up and help them have a better life. And he was a tough guy though. I mean, I've heard stories. He would go in on his mule. He had a six-shooter,
Mm.
and he would go into a community that was fairly hostile, a village, and he knew that probably knives were out for him, and he could throw a can in the air and hit that can all six times with his gun.
Oh, oh.
So he was a sharpshooter, and the villagers would look at that and they were like, oh, a little bit of respect here for this gringo that's coming into our village. And we we recently donated that gun to La Sierra. They have the Stahl Museum
Yeah,
there.
yeah, we do.
They really wanted the gun, and so, but that was his. I don't know how he got that into the country. Uh, he never shot anyone with it, but it commanded some respect to let people know I'm here, and just please don't hurt me and I won't hurt you.
I've
But
also, yeah,
no, go ahead.
I've also seen pictures of him baptizing people in several instances. Was he also an ordained minister, or he did it as an elder, ordained elder? What do you know?
No, he wasn't, or in fact we have in the documents his license. He became an ordained minister. He was known more as a doctor. He pulled probably thousands of teeth and minor surgeries, but was also an ordained minister of the gospel. So you're right. There were times, hundreds of baptisms. Again, the success of baptisms was much more pronounced in his first 15 years. It
Mhm.
was much harder in the Amazon jungle, um, a whole different environment. And of course, there's another great book, it's called In the Amazon Jungle that he wrote.
Mhm.
And a whole different, when you think of Peru, it's really three cultures, three geographic areas: Amazon, the coast, and the highlands.
Mhm.
All three very different. There's over 50 dialects spoken in the Amazon.
Mhm.
And then Aymara and Quechua is very pronounced. Quechua is an official language along with Spanish. But yes, he definitely baptized certainly thousands before he left Peru after almost 30 years of being there.
Do you think he was ordained as a pastor before going to the mission, or it happened while he was there? I don't know. Maybe it is not
I,
known.
I need to look at his license. I believe it was once he arrived.
Yeah, yeah,
I would need to confirm that.
sure.
Um,
Mhm.
it's again, it's so interesting how once he received the blessing of the church, he didn't let, as we would say in English, grass grow under his feet. He moved. he bought that ticket and was heading down. So my sense is once he arrived, but I would need to look at his license that he had as a pastor and look at the dates of when that happened.
As the church was growing and with that also organizational structures and offices and things like that. Do you know how you alluded to that a little bit? How did he relate with the organized church? Because so far he had been quite uh, a captain over the region with no superiors, no chain of command, no on his own.
Yeah, what I found even meeting and living in Peru, and then some comes from the literature, he was quick to delegate. I've talked to people uh, that up in years, and I was very young, who they said, "Oh, your grandpa delegated that I was in charge of this area."
Hmm,
So he would delegate. He much more enjoyed being on those front lines, but very collaborative,
mhm,
certainly with authority. He was one to be very respectful of the general conference, division, union, missions. However, he did not seek to be in those roles. He much preferred to just be on the front line and out there establishing the beginning of groups and organizations, and then moving on. And he really enjoyed saying to the local people who had learned, they had their education, take this over. Now it's yours. And that's really appropriate. I think often he was a foreigner in someone else's country. He was very sensitive to that. And so the sooner that local talent could take over and operate and run, the better off things were. And he knew that. He knew that. And he had some great collaborators that came in from Argentina, like Pedro Calvermatter, Elder Richard Hayden from the U.S., Barbara Westphal.
mhm.
However, more than anything, he was anxious to delegate out to local talent, those who were in Peru, and it was much more sustainable than continuing to bringing more individuals in from other countries. And I think he learned that quickly, and that was just in his DNA. Let's set up the people here to succeed, and they will. It won't. It's not as sustainable to bring in foreigners into a country. So once those who were there were able to run it, he turned it over. Said, take it.
Wonderful. Mhm. Finally, toward the end of the 30s, yeah, or later, he returned to America. Do you know what made him take that decision?
His health. This was 1939.
Mhm.
They were in Iquitos, which is the headwaters of the Amazon. My father was born there. So when he was about 2 and my grandpa was raising him and his kids, they all decided they should come back to the US to raise my dad, my aunt and uncle. And so they all decided to return. So they actually took the long journey down the Amazon,
Mm,
came over around to New York, and then ended up in Paradise, California.
mhm.
Um, However, it's well documented that great grandpa wasn't content to just retire. He immediately began to work among the Klamath Indians in Northern California and Southern Oregon. And the letters stopped coming to great grandma, to Anna. So she went looking for him
Hmm,
and found him living in a hut with a dirt floor. And he was pretty sick. So she said, come home. So he came home and yet wasn't content just to sit. He was on the camp meeting tours. and also took on a church and became a chaplain at the local Adventist hospital,
Hmm.
and kept that almost until his death. He died relatively young in his early 70s of cancer, and he just had a full life, but a tough life. It was tough.
Hmm. However, Anna lived a rather long life.
She surpassed him by several decades. She lived into her late 90s.
Hmm.
So I have pictures still of where I'm sitting on her lap as a little baby, and she, she was very healthy. Even in her 90s, she could lean over and touch the palms of her hands on the ground without bending her knees. So
Hmm.
she was into exercise, calisthenics,
Hmm.
and quite the lady, quite the lady. So
Yeah. You have mentioned that in some universities, especially, there are centers established to preserve the memory and the legacy, and also to foster research and studies. You mentioned La Sierra. Could you tell a little more about that?
sure,
And if there are other places as well?
we had intended to spread it out. It was challenging to find a church entity that had interest. We
Mhm.
had probably 50 boxes of letters, documents,
Oh.
artifacts, snakeskins,
Mhm.
weapons, spears, blowguns, pictures, uh, and they were all in my grandpa's garage and my father. And I was in my late 20s. I had been working in Peru, and so whenever I'd come home, my dad would keep saying, son, what do we do with all of this? It's going to deteriorate in our garage. So we contacted multiple church entities, and the one that really jumped and wanted it and said yes was the Stahl Museum in La Sierra.
Mhm.
And so we sent almost everything we had down there, and at least with the request that it be kept in in an area that would preserve it.
Mhm.
And that was all we asked. And with also the option, if we wanted to take certain pieces out, we could take certain pieces out. I mean, for example, there's a book in that museum that it fell into the river, the Ukiali River, and it floated for months and months. And
Oh.
some gentleman found it, and an indigenous, or well, an Indian, and he took it out and he put it in the sun, each leaf of the book, and then he read it and was converted. And then
Oh.
it's an amazing story, an amazing story. And that book is in the museum. There's a lot of other stuff there, and so that's probably mainly where at least the Stahl family has directed most of everything that we have. I
Mhm.
think even my uncle and my aunt tried to move everything there because there was an expressed interest.
Mhm. You mentioned two books he wrote, In the Land of the Incas, and the other one.
In the Amazon jungle.
Do you think they are still in print?
I have seen where on Amazon, and I don't know if they're being reprinted or just those that were published in the past. There's still some availability. Whenever can find them in libraries, particularly I'll see them in um, multiple copies
Mhm.
where if they're willing to give one up, I try to get it. Another good book that isn't still in print that I would recommend is by Barbara Westphal. It's Anna Stahl of the Andes and Amazon. And that went out of print years ago, but now it's back in print in our through Amazon, the Adventist bookstores, and it gives a good overview of their work and Barbara Westfall's a good writer. She wrote a very good book.
She is from the family of the pioneers in the work in South America, is she?
She is. She is from that family, yes, and actually went and worked with grandpa and grandma, and then then wrote the book, which is just well written.
Well, thank you so much for what you have shared. It's so precious for our times, and I'm sure it will galvanize the imagination and the desire of action among some of our viewers, and keep fresh the spirit of self-sacrificing mission where that is needed. A final word to our viewers.
Well, just what a privilege to speak to your viewers. And again, I just think this method of being with the people, mingling with them, showing sympathy, ministering to their needs, and win their confidence. I think that's something that as we work each day and wherever we are, as engineers, lawyers, doctors, builders, wherever we are, mechanics, employing those methods, it will work.
Thank you very much. And I can't wish to meet you again in this program at that time about you and your mission. Thank you very much. God bless you
Thank
and
you.
your family and your mission.
Thank you, and God bless.
Mii și mii de misionari au străbătut lumea, ducând mângâiere, vindecare, speranță și credință pentru milioane și milioane din lumea întreagă. Dar misiunea nu s-a finalizat. Oameni în nevoie sunt încă pretutindeni pe strada noastră, ca și pe cealaltă față a pământului. La care dintre aceștia dorim să mergem? Pentru ce fel de misiune ne-a dotat Creatorul nostru? Să nu ne întoarcem la treburile noastre obișnuite, fără să îi dăm un răspuns celui care ne-a salvat pentru a salva. Pe curând!